Uh, Welcome to another Friday in the world. This is our final reading, of 4 for this semester. We started with 3 readings that we had during National Poetry Month, and then they're actually kind of consoling. They're nice, consoling experiences, so we thought we'd invite another reader. So we invited Farid Matuk. And oh, hi! And his daughter Gianna. Farid is currently the Holloway Professor of Poetry and Poetics at UC Berkeley. And Farid and his family, including the poet Susan Briante, were up in Berkeley until maybe the end of March or so when they came back to Tucson. But he's still teaching through UC Berkeley. He also teaches at the University of Arizona here. He is the author of a couple of books, including This Is a Nice Neighborhood, which came out from Letter Machine 10 years ago. Letter Machine is a press that used to exist in part in Tucson. His most recent book was published by the University of Arizona Press, The Real Horse. Both of those books are currently quarantined in our collection at the library, Pima Community College Library. I first became aware of Farid through a chapbook that came out maybe 15 years ago or so called Is It the King? Which was published by Effing Press, a small press that was based out of Austin, I believe. And when poetry is really good, it feels like you're reading a star chart, or it feels like you're reading an almanac. It feels like you're reading a book of recipes. That was the kind of effect that book had on me 14 or 15 years ago or so, when I had no idea who the poet was. And now I feel fortunate to count him among my friends and neighbors here in Tucson. So as with previous readings, we're inviting people, if they have any questions, you can submit them via chat. There will be just a short Q&A after Farid reads. And we'll choose from those questions and we'll go from there. So thank you again for attending. And here's Farid Matuk.
Can you all hear me okay? Okay, thank you so much. It's a treat to read for a library. I tell my students often you don't need me or a classroom to become a poet, you just need a library. So thank you for hosting all the readers you've hosted in the last few weeks, and thank you for including me. I'm gonna start with an essay that came out a couple of years ago. A couple of colleagues run an essay event, I'll call it, every March, themed around March Madness. March Vladness, people are invited to write about goth. March Fadness, people were invited to write about top 40 songs. And then they compete, the essays are pitted against one another. So anyway, I wrote this for that. And it's about the song Jump Around by the band House of Pain. The essay is called Throw the Lights Away. The only other setup thing I'll say is that chiasmus is that rhetorical figure where two parts of a sentence interchange the order of the words so that the two parts of the sentence come to mirror one another, but inversely. All right, throw the lights away. I was 18 years old in 1992 when House of Pain released Jump Around. It's a party jam with staying power, and maybe that's all there is to say. That year in Southern California, white men were setting each other free all kinds of ways. It was a tradition. Traditions march proud, or they march in complicated ways. Sub rosa, which is another rhetorical figure, sub rosa, everything under the cover of something else, something prettier. Goddamn 1998's American History X, the film. What passed as an unflinching look at white supremacy always seemed to me more of a visual love letter to the physicality of Ed Norton's Derek Vineyard character. Do you remember the film's opening sequence? Derek's little brother Danny, played by Edward Furlong, sleeps in one room, while in another, Derek violently tops his skinhead girlfriend, his boots still on. What was it with boys' feet as substitutes for their dicks in these kinds of scenes from the 1990s? 3 years earlier, Larry Clark's well-used eye made sure that we saw a similar shot in the film Kids. Only that time it was Telly's sweaty socked foot looking for purchase on the bed sheets as he pushed further into the next virgin girl we knew he was exposing to HIV. Thinking without subtlety, trading only in the cheapest likenesses of categories. I ask, if white boys are dangerous in a viral way, who is the host? By the time Derek disentangles himself from his girlfriend to confront two young Black men who were messing with his car, we know their Black bodies will be the film's first sacrifices to our civil, liberal sympathies. Beneath the cover of that sympathy, the camera eagerly enlists its high contrast film in the passion of Derek's nearly nude, glowing white body, stalking, it seemed, the night itself as he walked out to confront the two men. Beneath that, we get the operatic passion of glances exchanged between Derek as he gives himself over to be cuffed by the police after he kills the men, and his brother Danny, whose grown-in buzz cut and swan neck make him look like some misplaced Joan of Arc, to borrow a phrase from Patti Smith. Trying, with his big eyes, to pull his brother back from a moral abyss I'm still not sure ever really opens up to interrupt the paths of white men. When Derek gets out of jail, the film needs to show him arguing with his mom's liberal boyfriend about the, quote, LA riots. I was among those nerdy poor kids of color who, despite our deep immersion in police surveillance, mostly avoided encounters with actual officers. A streak of good luck that gave me a sense of what it must have been like up in the hills of Orange County and along the coast, where SoCal white life looked like nothing but expansive possibility. In retrospect, it seems that whether we felt some claim to that expanse or not, we nonetheless spent the rest of the decade talking in one way or another about the last days of April and first days of May 1992. We were experts on policing and on staging civil disobedience. We knew the names of all the officers who beat Black motorist Rodney King, and we knew the names of the men who beat white trucker Reginald Denny. We had opinions about how batons should work. Or if we kept our mouths shut, we were still steeped in the air of those who affected this expertise, chiasmus as fuck in our host and virus dialectic. Based in Los Angeles, the band House of Pain released Jump Around only 6 or so months after Rodney King's attackers were acquitted, and many years before Marshall Mathers' internal rhymes would expand the pantheon of MCs to include the outline of an ideal white boy. So when House of Pain's frontman Everlast claimed, "I never eat a pig because a pig is a cop, or better yet, a Terminator, like Arnold Schwarzenegger," we heard him making a sympathetic overture to kids like us who already knew how to sleep through the glare of the LAPD's helicopter searchlight. Categories persist in failing. And failure can be a kind of street style, or it can be a particular street style if that street is the place where poor and lower middle class folks of different ethnic and racial backgrounds share air and time and materials. The internet tells me that only a handful of years before Jump Around, Everlast was just a kid trying to be a graffiti artist. He came out of Taft High School in the Valley, where, incidentally, Ice Cube was a peer. On the graffiti scene, Everlast fell under the tutelage of a revered young Black artist going by the name of Divine Styler, née Mark Richardson. Divine was just a kid too, but his work across graffiti, genre-blending experimental rap, and graphic art would make him a legend in the West Coast underground hip-hop scene. It was Divine who introduced Everlast to Ice-T, who in turn welcomed both boys into his Rhyme Syndicate collective. None of the ways those men failed, which is to say exceeded the boundaries of their categories, really complicated how their images were marketed to me in 1992. If we wanted to jump around my freshman dorm, we already had Black Sheep's song, The Choice Is Yours, or Tribe Called Quest's Scenario. But House of Pain was white. And while they nodded to the ways the Irish neighborhoods of their heritage had once been policed, the way mine was policed, beneath that overture, I only wanted to see them as rude and proximate embodiments of white masculine power. It was privately electric, the way that song made me feel my relation to public whiteness. Like I could be at once in their crew and one of the hoes they might smack. I heard misogyny in some of the songs by my favorite Black hip hop acts too. I heard misogyny everywhere. And I was boy enough to think that it served me. But I was brown enough to know House of Pain was white. Have you ever felt the whiplash speed with which you can convert being hurt into wanting to be hurt? It can still draw saliva into my mouth, even though I'm old enough and queer enough to know that sex can sometimes even be simple. From where could a brown kid marshal enough critical grace and distance to treat white thuggery like just another pop pose, when more than 20 years later, white men still jump around to set each other free in the stands of hockey games and football games with that song as their soundtrack? Yes, I know all kinds of bodies are in those stands, and that all kinds of bodies like to jump around to that song. Such is a capacious poetics of white dick. And white dick is nothing if not a universal work of lasting value. Would violent masculine whiteness have had a weaker claim on me if I'd never been an undocumented immigrant? If I'd never overheard a stray detail or two about the rapes my mother survived? If I'd never been sexually assaulted myself? Poor little wound stack. The literature of the object is already stacked high with the likes of me. In the place of a fuller rendering of my stories, I'll finish annotating not so much the song Jump Around, but the labor of listening to it with transcripts of homemade intimacies between white men and transcripts of white alphas offering their dominating services to willing customers. I don't care to police or shame anyone's consensual power play. I know all manner of care and calibration can be worked out under the cover of something else, something uglier. The point here is the surface of the coin. So I will mention as a heads up that these transcripts front load white supremacy, misogyny, and base hateful homophobia. but so does what passes for freedom in this country. And I'm trying to learn from James Baldwin, who said, "I know one thing from another, so I give you your problem back." That's the end of the essay. I won't read the footnotes because they really are horrific. But I'll just say, as a process of gathering them over about a year, I would just look for homemade, they had to be homemade videos, porn videos of men engaged in power play with one another. And I would transcribe what they said. I think there's enough time to read a poem from each of the books, just short little poems. This is from the book I'm Grateful is in the library collection. This is a Nice Neighborhood. And it's a diptych, 2 paired poems. As you accompany your death. Dear reader, you said to me upon my birth, the following accounts are guaranteed by nothing, but have been lovingly bound. Now you're dying. You keep thinking about it. I offer you this. A once told likeness of you pushes off your funerary canoe onto the Sumter tide and turns back to a small beach crowded with loose gangs of your likeness in floppy sun hats over blinking eyes, and says to them, sisters and sisters, this is how she approaches me. As you accompany your death. This is how she approaches me, set lone on the seeming body of the Pacific, to which you say, no. Honey, pull open the little window. Try to listen to the waves, to put it in your terms, the ocean swallows. Those girls as the things I once told you about me. And every dish in the small but much loved number of American trains we sometimes rode. And the trains themselves go down. The sound of these things breaking is the shelled call note of the waves. And of herself, the seeming body of the Pacific is what your mother made. This is from a chapbook that's now out of print. The poem is called My Daughter All Yourn. I'll dedicate this to my friends who are raising small ones right now. My daughter all yourn. Will she be closer to the falling away of the gaze of things than others? Hands on the water, she calls, scene setting. Hands on the table, water over the houses and hills swimming. Not the ocean or the sea, but the frame of time she'll tell of. Wild, happy yeses in her hands she bites through in rage when rage comes to her, or we do, and she's too small a flag. What does our house say? Those borrowed things, solid and whole, fabric lost to her, a greasy boy speaking fast at the pizza stand. More available to be seen, the young in their concerns. Amidst the old artifice, paint a boat and it will mean a dream. Put names of your dear ones in it, all yourn, standing up. These little soft hands she bites through, the bright white light of summer, shines off sand and vinyl siding, itself composed against the salt. And I'll close with this short poem that my daughter likes me to read whenever I can because it's made up of things she said. It's called Your Instructions. You are somebody else who didn't know me ever. Pretend that. But I was going to be here next to you, and the horse walked between us really slow, but really, and then a fire came and didn't hurt anybody. But only the horse forgot about it. Then I'll tell you what the word said. The shadow was a plane, pretend that. When you take your face out of the water, but then you have to take the water out of the bowl with you, like that dream. I only ever had 2 dreams, but then I was at Pump It Up with all my friends. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Farid. I have a question for you.
Okay.
So, and thank you again. So much to think about. You were saying that one thing you need to be a poet is a library, or what you need to be a poet is a library. So I'm wondering if you could share with us maybe a library origin story of yourself becoming a poet.
Yeah, really easily. 3rd grade, a book about George Washington or Paul Revere. Paul Revere. I think I liked him because he wasn't president, but he was still drawn like a superhero in the book I was holding. And there was something exciting that I couldn't categorize. You know how kids feel excitement, but it doesn't have fall into categories yet. There was something exciting about his body on that horse and going out at night and having to signal things. But what mattered wasn't the story or even that. It was that somebody had left a bookmark with a scratch and sniff sticker in the book. And that had left a tactile sensory layer in the book. So every time I opened it, I felt that. And I think that's the beginning, right? Like when we can pay attention to the kind of verbal, linguistic, narrative thing that's happening in the pages of the book, and to something else simultaneously, right? That kind of blurred vision that allows for other stuff to seep in. In that case, the smell of the bookmark that was pushed into the pages, and then the way that anticipation and fulfillment and diminished fulfillment every time, because every time I open the book, the smell is weaker. The way that organizes desire in life. Yeah. I mean, there's a more straight ahead answer, which is more directly about poetry, right? Like I was 16 when I found a bicentennial anthology that my older cousin had just left me, right? Published in 1976. And there was a particular poem in it by the poet Archibald MacLeish. And it was about a mute boy who walks to the back veranda of his house, and his family members are very dismissive of him. And he carries the pain of that dismissal into the gardener's shed. He walks beyond the veranda into the backyard, into the gardener's shed, and the gardener comes in the middle of his chores and realizes that the boy is hiding there and does not engage him, but it lets him have his privacy, and then walks out. I think that's the whole poem as I remember it. I've never been able to find the poem since. But something about that scene of being misunderstood and then being cared for by a man who also minded your boundaries, who allowed you a private world of imagination was interesting and compelling to me in a way that I could not have known until I found the poem. And then the story I usually tell my students is about our mutual acquaintance, Joshua Beckman, who never went to an MFA program, and the way he tells it anyway, lived in his van and worked at a food co-op and had a library card and spent his days at the library reading poems and reading, collected works and going deep and writing in dialogue with the things he was reading, and then became a poet. So I think that's what I mean most typically. Thank you for taking me back to third grade.
Oh yeah. Well, I have so many follow-up questions, but I think I'll leave it at this one, and then we'll say goodbye. But do you remember what the smell was of that scratch and sniff bookmark?
Oh yeah, it was some kind of faded fruit.
Faded fruit.
Yeah.
Faded as in F-A-T?
Both, but faded. It was fading. It was weakened. Some kind of strawberry.
Some kind of strawberry. That's perfect.
Yeah. Well,
thank you so much for sharing those memories.
Yeah, thank you for
asking. And thank you for reading to all of us. Thanks everyone for attending, and everybody stay safe. We have the library has a new Twitter account, Pima_CC Library, and I'm gonna post on there some more of Farid's work. Such incredible work and such a variety of it. So I hope you all check that out. Have a wonderful weekend, everyone, and thanks again, Farid.
Thank you so much.